Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Wednesday, November 20th, 2024. Phil Giraldi joins us now. Phil, a pleasure, my dear friend. Thank you for joining us. Do you think Donald Trump is a neocon at heart? And do you think you can conclude that from the people he has announced he plans to appoint to his cabinet who will be involved with national security? The Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Israeli ambassador, the director of the CIA, and the National Security Advisor.
Well, I would put it maybe somewhat differently. I don't think that Donald Trump is a neocon per se, because I think he does have a genuine, not exactly, I wouldn't describe it as anti-war head that he occasionally wears. And this manifests itself in certain ways. But I think there's a separate issue here. The issue is that basically he is very much dependent in a lot of different ways. Money would be one of the aspects, political support within Congress, and most of all, his willingness or unwillingness to confront Israel in any fashion when Israel is misbehaving. So I think he has a huge reluctance to do that. And this again comes out in the appointments that have been made in the foreign policy and national security areas for his new cabinet. I think what he's basically saying is that just like with Joe Biden, Israel is going to be the sacred cow, is going to be untouchable. And he is basically going to go along with everything Israel does up to, and this is what's the part that scares me, is up to employing Israel's secret nuclear weapons if push comes to shove in the Middle East. So we have two conflicts kind of on the boil right now, in which I see in the background the horror of possible nuclear war.
You and others on this show have instructed us that in many respects, Benjamin Netanyahu has more control over the American government than Joe Biden does. Would you say the same if you replace Biden, when we replace Biden with Trump?
Uh, I would say mostly the same, although it manifests itself differently. Trump and Biden come from different political environments in terms of their parties and what their parties want, and so on and so forth. And they are playing somewhat of a different game. But I think at the bottom line, they both agree that deferring to uh, Bibi Netanyahu's interests and his needs is something that is a lot easier for them to do and better for their political futures than it would be to try to fight him, because that would bring in the Israel lobby eventually on his side, and that would create all kinds of other issues that they'd prefer not to deal with. You would have to be an idiot not to realize that the United States is being manipulated and controlled by Israel. These guys realize that. They all realize it. But the fact is, they've made an agreement with the devil and essentially are willing to play the game so that they can get through this with the least stress and the least complications from this country, which is no ally, no democracy, and no friend of the United States. That's the real tragedy.
Getting back to Trump, but transitioning to Ukraine, he has said many times during the campaign he'll end the Ukraine war in 24 hours. I mean, with Joe Biden authorizing American forces to aim and trigger long-range missiles into Russia, and now with Joe Biden authorizing Ukrainian forces to use anti-personnel mines, is that even conceivable? One more. And with Joe Biden claiming through Jake Sullivan he will spend the $7 billion with a B remaining on the congressional authorization, but as yet unspent on Ukraine. Is it even conceivable that Trump could end this war in 24 hours?
And you might as well throw into that group the fact that they just refused to even consider a ceasefire, which we had heard was a done deal. So there's a lot of chicanery going on here. So it's just depending on how you twist it here, it's a situation that is not under U.S. control. As I say, the dangers in this are manifest, and the fact that Joe Biden could not see or chose not to see, or whoever, admittedly, whoever is advising him, since he seems to be incompetent, that it's impossible to understand how you can get this close to what might turn into a nuclear exchange of some kind, and the Russians, by defining what their nuclear policy is now, which just happened, also tells us that they are quite willing, if they are in a situation where they're under attack, to use all their resources available to defend themselves. And of course, we have the Israelis totally reckless, totally out of control, believing they are God's chosen who are destined to rule the entire Middle East from the Nile to the Euphrates. This is a formula for a horror story beyond belief, and yet Joe Biden is embracing it. And fortunately, we don't have much time with him left. But I think Donald Trump is a smart enough guy in his businessman persona, his ability to go back and forth on issues, to realize that there's a lesson to be learned from this, and that Biden has taken us to the brink of catastrophe, and that should not be the route that Trump takes after he's in power.
Here's the latest from the Russian government on the Biden announcement, although you're going to hear from Foreign Minister Lavrov that they've gotten no official announcement. But the key point that he makes, you'll hear it in a moment, is at the very end when he says we are now in a qualitatively new phase of the war. Chris Cut, this is today, Chris Cut number 14.
Well, on the decision of the United States to allow Ukrainian regime to use missiles up to 300 kilometers long, we read what the New York Times published about this. There are still no confirmation either from the White House or from the Pentagon, but we basically take our position on the basis of what is going on physically. And physically, ATACMS, apparently not as long as 300 kilometers, are being used, including this early morning in Russia, against the Bryansk Oblast of Russia, which is bordering Ukraine. And we proceed from the understanding that this is happening, and that any modification of ATACMS cannot be used without American experts and instructors, including satellite data, including programming and targeting. The President mentioned this several times. If long-range missiles are going to be applied from Ukraine into Russian territory, it will also mean that they are operated by American experts, military experts. And we will be taking this as a qualitatively new phase of the Western war against Russia, and we'll react accordingly.
How do you read that, Phil? American intel will download data, top secret data, from an American satellite. American technicians will program that data into the computer controlling the device. Americans will pull the trigger. the projectiles will land in Russia. The Russians perceive this as a qualitatively new phase and say they'll react accordingly. Are they going to kill the Americans that are firing this? Are they going to attack other American assets? Are they going to aim nuclear weapons in some Western direction and say, hey, we're ready to go?
Well, first of all, I think he's making shall we say, philosophical argument about what's going on here, which is essentially he's saying that this is the U.S. effort to attack and weaken Russia, which has been the stated goal ever since the beginning of this war, basically consisted of the U.S. funding the Ukrainians and arming them. Now, whether you consider that an act of war or an act of participation in war, kind of is a judgment call. But now he's saying this has been stepped up to a new level where we actually have weapon systems that are being fired and used and backed up by satellite intelligence and so on and so forth to use them. And this is being done by Americans in attacks against Russia. This is a different story now. And he's saying essentially that because of this, we are in a situation where we have to use our resources as we see fit to counter this. And of course, this has taken what was at least a situation that in a certain level was kind of manageable because even though there were boots on the ground, we weren't advertising that fact. And now we are engaged in a war against Russia, and there's no other way to look at it.
Now, add to this Biden's authorization announced last night for the use of anti-personnel mines, of which, as you know, there are two variants, one operated by remote control, one operated by the proximity of the unfortunate person who's there. It is the latter that the United States is sending. These things are unlawful in 160 different countries.
Right.
Only the United States, Russia, China, Ukraine, and Iran have not signed this treaty. Just as he said 2 years and as recently as 1 month ago, he would not allow long-range offensive weaponry, President Biden also said he would not allow these anti-personnel mines. What do you think he's trying to accomplish? To delay the inevitable till after January 20th?
Well, I kind of prefer to see a political agenda here. I mean, you have to put it in the context of what's been happening over the last 2 weeks, which is basically we had an election and Biden and his party were repudiated. And when, they are looking for a fix that will handicap what Trump might be doing that would be exploitable as a way of increasing the damage to the Democratic Party and to Biden and the people close to him. Also, I kind of see it that way. Let's see how bad we can make Joe Biden look. So Biden is, meanwhile, he's taking an offensive action. He's locking in stuff that will be difficult for Trump to deal with. And he's hoping that Trump falls on his face. So we shall see how this plays out. And we shall know, I think, pretty soon exactly how this is going to play out.
Going back to Israel, Phil, today Prime Minister Netanyahu publicly rejected a Hezbollah peace proposal that had been negotiated by Amos Hochstein, who probably is an Israeli agent, but he works for the State Department. He was born in Israel. He fought for the IDF. He enjoys dual citizenship. He is in charge of the negotiations for a ceasefire with respect to Lebanon, Hezbollah, and Israel. The Israeli negotiators and the Hezbollah negotiators had agreed to it, and then Prime Minister Netanyahu pulled the rug out from under him. Ambassador Freeman and Aaron Mate are of the conclusion that Bibi's playing the same game with Hezbollah that he is with Hamas. He has no interest whatsoever in a ceasefire, but to placate the domestic political situation confronting him, he'll allow the negotiations to go on. Why would he embarrass Hochstein like this?
Well, first of all, I would point out that probably most of the senior people in the State Department are already Israeli agents. But I would say in this case, uh, Netanyahu is showing the Americans with a new regime coming in, a new leadership coming in, who's the boss. I mean, if something this blatant, where clearly there was some kind of agreement that was probably made by whatever negotiators Netanyahu sent to the discussions, so they agreed to it. Hezbollah agreed to it. Hamas agreed to it. The United States agreed to it, and Bibi Netanyahu says no. He's the man in charge.
Here's well, before we get there is a movie coming out called The Bibi Files, which apparently consists of actual footage of interrogations of the prime minister and his wife over these alleged bribes. One of them has to do with a $42,000 diamond bracelet purchased for Mrs. Netanyahu by the billionaire Hollywood producer born in Israel named Arnon Milchan. And apparently Mrs. Netanyahu did not like the bracelet and they sent it back. This movie cannot be shown in Israel. Mm. Don't the Israelis believe in freedom of speech? Aren't they a democracy in the Middle East? They are, according to as recently as yesterday, Senator John Thune, the new majority leader in the U.S. Senate.
Yeah, Thune made sure we understood that they're our best friend and our closest ally, and we will do anything for them. Just a message to send to the Israelis, and make sure they continue to grind us in the dust. So it's that sort of thing. Yeah, Sarah Netanyahu, of course, is a discerning woman, and I guess a $42,000 bracelet coming from Arnon Milchan, the Israeli spy who stole our nuclear secrets and who continues to visit Hollywood. It's an interesting little circle of things that Israelis get away with. And this film, no, they will not show it because they do not have free speech when it's anything that is contrary or damaging to the government. But of course, we're heading in that direction too. We've had proposals from the Biden administration for a disinformation office, which would have done that. Trump has been talking about expelling from the United States anyone who is critical or supportive of the Palestinian cause, are critical of the Israelis. He says we don't want any Jew haters here, so I guess we're all going to be shipped out to Madagascar. So this is the kind of crap that's going down because people put up with this stuff from the Israelis and from Israeli supporters in the United States.
Yesterday, on the floor of the House of Representatives, the House failed to pass on to the Senate H.R. 9495. Most people have not heard of this. It's a dramatic event because it came up the last minute at the end of the term, because there were no hearings. It had to pass by a 2/3 vote. It didn't. It had a majority, half the Democrats, a third of the Democrats and all of the Republicans. This is a Republican measure asked for by President Trump, which would allow him, through the Secretary of the Treasury, to withdraw the tax-exempt status of any tax-exempt organization that expresses support for people, verbally expressing support for people the government considers terrorists. This, of course, is a great assault on freedom of speech. One Republican voted against it.
I can guess who.
Well, he is being considered by Donald Trump to become the Secretary of Agriculture. And notwithstanding that consideration, he still had the courage to vote against this monstrosity, the great Congressman Thomas Massey from Kentucky.
Good man. Good man.
Yes, a very good man. But here's an example of the absence of freedom of speech in the United States. A minority voted against this. The majority in the House wants it. Every single Republican plus 145 Democrats, just a few fewer Democrats, and it would have passed. Here's what happens when someone expresses a minority view on the floor of the Senate. This is a little outrageous and somewhat humorous at the end, but the speaker is Ayman Odeh, O-D-E-H, leader of Hadash Talal. He's a Palestinian Israeli who was a bona fide elected member of the Knesset. Cut number 13.
There are 17,385 babies in Gaza, which your system has killed. Of those, 825 are under the age of a year. There are 35,055 orphan babies in Gaza. The blood of all of them will haunt you. And still in your impudence, you wonder how you are accused in the International Criminal Court. Benjamin Netanyahu, what is your vision? What is your vision? For over 30 years, you have been a serial killer of peace.
Get off the platform immediately. Get off the platform immediately. Get off the platform immediately.
A serial killer of peace. What is your vision? A serial killer of peace.
Get off the platform immediately.
I mean, could you imagine that happening in the House of Representatives to Thomas Massey or the United States Senate to Bernie Sanders?
Yeah, I can imagine it. And I can imagine it's coming. I mean, one of the things in this bill that did not pass, or did not pass with enough of a majority, was it would given President Trump and his successors the authority to take what they call 501c3 organizations. These are charitable and educational organizations that get tax exemptions. If they say the wrong thing, this will give the president authority under his own signature, over his own signature, to take away their tax exemptions. This is where we're heading.
Well, I don't know what's going to happen. My guess is the Republicans will try and pass this again, because if they do it the right way, that is through congressional hearings, they only need a simple majority. When they try and rush it through the last minute, that's when they need 2/3, which they didn't succeed in getting. Can Marco Rubio stand up to Sergei Lavrov and be respected by him?
No. I mean, Marco Rubio has given no evidence whatsoever of having any kind of, I like this word that the Palestinian was using, the vision of Netanyahu. Well, Netanyahu's vision is quite simple. He's going to kill all the Palestinians. And Rubio is that kind of thinker. You know, he's very black and white in terms of how he sees Latin America, particularly where his family comes from. And he's been a strong supporter of the Israel lobby. He's from Florida, where, of course, the Israel lobby is quite powerful. And so, you know, it's more of the same. He won't be able to stand up to him intellectually. And instead of even trying to do that, he'll just basically do things to figure out to punish him or to punish the Russians. We'll be seeing more sanctions. We'll be seeing more of the same kind of nonsense down the road, even if Donald Trump is truthfully looking for a solution to that war, which I will believe when I see.
Will Pete Hegseth, when Donald Trump says, "I want to bomb bridges in downtown Tehran," say, "Mr. President, would you please, you got to consider the natural and probable consequences of that"? Or really, is he more likely to say, "When do you want us to do it"?
Yeah, he'll fly over and put his signature on the bombs, and hope that they land and kill lots of Iranians. I mean, this is pathetic. This Hegseth guy, he's a nightmare, and the fact that he's going to be Secretary of Defense is frightening.
All right, Phil, thank you very much, my dear friend. Thanks for your time. We have a short week next week. I hope you can find some time to join us.
Okay, thank you very much for having me on.
Sure, all the best. Coming up for the remainder of this day at 4 o'clock, Professor Mearsheimer at 4:30, Max Blumenthal at 5 o'clock, Colonel Larry Wilkerson. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.